This episode is brought to you by BigMooseCoffeeCompany.co.
Pal, and welcome again to... there's no point even counting episodes anymore, is there?
I don't know why you're even doing it in the introduction anymore. We lost count 2 seasons ago. We haven't even strictly defined what a season is, but welcome to another podcast.
Another episode of the Everything Endurance podcast. We did a bit of a podcast sesh yesterday, locked ourselves in a dark room and spoke to some corkers of guests, really. Yeah. And we've got another day lined up today, so properly excited.
Yeah, we're very excited about this one. We've got a really good breakfast guest this morning.
Yeah, so with this guest as well, I was very keen to speak to her last year when a lot of things happened, but she's been quite busy.
Yeah, just a little bit.
So we've managed for the dust to settle, so to speak, and then we've managed to grabbed 30 minutes with her today, which super excited about.
Totally. I get a lot of opportunities in a year nowadays to be at finish lines, and you know it's like on big races, people cross lines, it's a big moment and it's very emotional. The biggest one I've ever seen was January last year, and it was this guest crossing the line.
Well, it makes sense to bring her in.
Yeah, I think we should say who it is. Shall we do it?
Want to go?
Good morning, Jasmin Paris.
Hey!
Hello.
Thanks for being with us, Jasmin. It's really appreciated.
You're very welcome. Yeah, it's good to be here.
Thank you. I suppose you'll have heard a lot of hyperbole over the last year, but it really was a massive moment with repercussions that went everywhere. You shaving 12 hours off a course record on the spine last year. But, not to disappoint anyone who's desperate to hear about that at the moment, we were going to go back just a little bit, actually, and talk a little bit more about your journey into running in the first place. Because there's no doubt that what you managed to do last year was inspirational for an awful lot of people. And we want to dig a bit further into that. There's a lot more to learn. Jasmin Paris has become synonymous with the spine, but you were quite a runner before that.
Yeah, I've been running for about just over 10 years now. So, but I've always been, I guess, very outdoorsy and very active, even as a small child. So probably all comes from that.
And when would you say you became a runner?
Well, I think I really once I left university, the first year I was working in practice. I was working as a vet in a small animal practice in the Peak District, and I went along to a local fell race, loved it, and joined a local club. So before that, I was definitely very much an adult by the time I started to run. Before that, I occasionally went on a sort of 15 to 20 minute run, but I really wouldn't have described myself as a runner at that point.
It seems to be a common thing, Jasmin, that people are coming into the sport quite late. When you were starting the running journey, as it typically happens, you was in an area where there's such heritage and such history of fell running and running through the hills and things. Do you think that because of your location, you took a bit of a sideways journey into running? Because I imagine that one of your first races must have been in the Lake District area. It's one of those areas, I suppose, when we heard about Paul Tierney and stuff like that coming into running, he just had this really different experience of coming in compared to the typical journey through like park runs and things like that. When you was signing up for your first few races, were they that kind of run? Were they felly? Were they in the hills and all things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the first is Peak District, not the Lake District, but they're pretty close. It's fine.
Sorry, a large green lumpy area. We got confused.
You're very right. I really wasn't a road runner that turned into a hill runner. I was immediately a hill runner. And I think my journey, in a way, it was a natural progression because I'd always done lots of hiking in the hills and lots of actually long distance hiking as well. And they're not, I wouldn't say that's so dissimilarly from long sort of hill running. I would say that hiking long distances in the hills and mountains is pretty similar to running an ultra race on the hills. So I don't think it was. I think it was kind of a natural progression. It was a way of me getting into the hills on a sort of a daily basis around a busy work life, and yeah, it was fantastic. It was sort of exhilarating and a sense of freedom in that sense. Yeah, and the reason the initial sort of spark for it was that a colleague suggested I go along to this local hill race, and as I say, I just had a go, and I realised what fun it was. So I think if it had been a road race, I wouldn't have experienced the same sort of joy and thrill of it, and I'm not sure that I would have stuck at it. So the fact that it was in the hills and in those wild places really was a key component that made me fall in love.
So when was the first moment that you thought, oh, hang on a minute, I'm quite good at this? Was there a podium or a race in particular that you kind of had that change from, oh, this is an enjoyable thing that I like doing in my spare time, to, oh, actually, I could probably have a good go at some big races here?
I guess maybe I don't remember I guess it was a sort of gradual thing. The first time I guess won a longer hill race was probably at Sleoch in Scotland, and that must have been around, I don't know, 2011, 2012 maybe. And I very much remember that win because I think it was previously to that I'd actually been anemic and I didn't know about it. And once they treated that, I guess all my efforts at training suddenly paid off and I suddenly got a lot better very quickly. And I remember that point because I went from being sort of very much middle of the pack to winning this race. And that was a kind of defining moment when I realised actually maybe I'm not that bad at this after all. And then after that, I guess it was a gradual thing when I realised that the longer I race and the rougher the terrain, the better I seem to be compared with other people. So that was a kind of gradual realisation.
Well, you say gradual, you're talking sort of 2011-12 there. What, by 2016 it was the Skyrunning World Championships, is that right? Yeah. So I guess it was bit by bit between then.
So I guess that was the point then. So around 2016 must have been the time where Spine started coming onto your radar of a race in the future that you might have a crack at. How long was that journey from, okay, the Spine is something I want to do, to being on the start line?
Actually, you say that really wasn't very long actually at all, because I knew the Spine existed and I followed it along with, I guess, thousands of other people every year in winter. But to be honest, it wasn't a race that I really contemplated doing myself. I thought it was a bit of a crazy thing to do. It seemed like it just seemed a bit miserable. I couldn't really justify why you would want to put yourself through that. And whilst it was exciting to follow, I didn't really have any. It wasn't particularly tempting to me. But I guess there must have been some seed must have been sown somewhere. And I guess maybe that question of, if it's so hard, could you do it? That sort of question in my mind, maybe that was lying there dormant. And really, I think the key was that when I finished my 2008 season after having my daughter and still sort of feeling I wasn't quite back at my previous form, I needed a bit of motivation to train over the winter, and all these components came together and I suddenly had the idea of signing up for the Spine. Yeah, and then I did. So it was a bit of a sort of turnaround in what I always said I would never run the race, and then I suddenly signed up. So it wasn't so much it wasn't a long held ambition. It was more of a sudden spontaneous decision, and one that ended up working out quite well.
Yeah, it makes it even more remarkable when it was, I'll throw this into my end of year running. So I suppose there was little expectation on your side when you was at the start line. Then I suppose it was a case, because we spoke to Ian Keith and he was like, oh, this was a couple of years journey. I went and did the first year as a recce, then the second year I was going to have a crack at it, and blah blah blah. And I think that's the kind of story in for a lot of runners. you've obviously picked this up, thought, yeah, right, I'm going to have a crack at this, keep it as something to motivate me through the winter. So at the start line, what were your expectations for yourself? Was it just a case of finishing, or did you secretly in the back of your head think, yeah, I could probably put in a course record and shake the feathers of anyone that's ran this race before?
I guess there was a sort of sense of unknown because I'd never run a race like this before. I didn't really know how the sleep aspect would pan out. I know generally that I'm quite good at sleep deprivation just from working lots of long hours as a vet, as a specialist vet, and having a small child obviously doesn't really let me sleep through the night, or at least didn't at that point. But so I wasn't sure. I'd never run a race of this kind of length without stopping. Obviously there was the other aspects, the navigation, the fact that it was winter. There's a kind of big mental component to doing a race like this, probably bigger than any race I'd run before. At the same time, for me, this was probably the first race in my life that I trained specifically for. I trained for three and a half months focused on the spine. I also had a coach, so Damien Hall coached me for the spine specifically.
He literally wrote the book.
Yeah, I when I was on sort of standing on the start line, I knew that I'd really sort of given my training everything that I could in the circumstances, having a small child at home, and I actually felt pretty well prepared. So I would be lying to say that I wasn't competitive. I did want to try and win it. I wasn't sure about the record because I honestly think that in a race like the Spine, and I can't state this enough, I think it's hugely dependent on weather conditions, and there have been other years that have been good weather conditions as well, but the year that I broke the record, it was pretty favourable, so it was favourable for a fast time. So I wasn't sort of really thinking about the record, but I was thinking about trying to finish at the top of the field for sure. Yeah.
And that record was outstanding for anyone who was living under a rock at the time. 12 hours sounds like a long time, but 83 hours was what it took you to do it in. How much sleep would you say you did manage to pack in that time?
I think about 3 hours, just under really. I think I slept a sort of a proper sleep for about 2.25 hours at checkpoint 3. So that was on the second night. And then on the third night, I slept. I didn't really sleep. I just lay down and had this sort of rest for about 30, 40 minutes. I would have probably tried to sleep if it hadn't been for Eugenie chasing me and me not wanting to be found at the checkpoint waiting for him when he arrived. So I just got up and left. So it was a bit of a gamble with my sleep on that race. And certainly I think 3 hours is probably cutting it pretty fine in terms of how much rest I got. But it worked out okay in the end, yeah.
Even with the sleep deprivation of, being a new mum at the time and all of the long work hours, nothing can prepare you, I suppose, for 3 hours in 83. That is some doing. I know that the young baby would have been some preparation for it, but surely you were still absolutely exhausted. And you must have had symptoms of sleep deprivation at some point towards the end in that, because no matter how prepped you are, that's an obscene amount of time to go and perform at that level with just 3 hours sleep. Was there any particular moments where it did become an issue and you thought, I may have made a mistake here?
I guess on the last day I was kind of aware of how that I was pushing it kind of to the limits, in the sense that I was having sort of hallucinations, and everything that I looked at sort of changed its form. The paving stones that I was running along on the Pennine Way, the sort of stone slabs, I could see sort of horses and nuns in those, and I saw a pig in the heather. I saw a pig in the heather. I saw like a tree doing yoga at one point. It was quite bizarre. And then as I got closer to the finish line and I was running along that little road in the dark, all the trees seemed to be sort of people waving their hands at me at the side of the road. So I for sure was having some kind of hallucinations, and at the same time I was also on that last day falling asleep on my feet. So I would periodically fall asleep, and then I'd wake up and I'd sort of panic as I woke up because I had no idea where I was, and then I'd realize I was on the hills, and I'd think I was in the Peak District, and then I would realize it was the Cheviots, and then I would realize I was doing the Pennine Way, and then I'd realize I was actually racing along the Pennine Way, and then I'd have this panic moment that I'd actually gone off the route while I was asleep, which I think, these were probably micro sleeps, but that was a kind of recurring theme of that last day on the Cheviots. And I also got pretty cold on that last day. So I stopped at one point, kind of got into a ditch because there's not much cover up on the tops of the moors there. And I put on all the clothes I had. So I think I was wearing 5 or 6 layers on my top, and I was wearing 3 pairs of trousers, one waterproof and two leggings. I was wearing my hat and gloves, and sort of literally everything that I had in my bag I put on. And I was only just warm enough moving along. So I think it kind of shows that when you get to that stage, you've not really got much reserve anymore. And so, yeah, I do think I was pushing my body to the kind of limits of what it could do. I felt I was still safe at that point. Yeah. So.
Well, I mean, it sounds like you're as high as a kite for those hallucinations.
People have to pay a lot for that.
Yeah, you have to pay a lot for drugs and things to get those kind of hits. I think the thing that the reason as well, when you went through this amazing journey, you pushed your body to the limit and limits that have never been probably pushed. It seems to be a common thing of. And that's why scientists are taking a lot of interest in research, because people like yourself are kind of pushing new boundaries of what is possible. It's all very impressive, and I think a lot of people, that's why they fall in love with the idea of the spine and things. For me, just because I'm at that phase of life now where a lot of my friends are having babies and setting up new families, I think the most impressive thing for me in all of this is that you finding the time to commit to the training with a young family, because it's not like you're popping to the gym for 20-minute sessions. In your 3-month prep for this, you must have been getting up super early or going out super late for runs. How did your training look at that moment in time? Because to me, that's probably the 3 months prior, the defining moments for you to put in that performance.
Yeah, so I did all my training really early in the morning. My daughter was pretty good at sleeping sort of in the sort of between, I guess, 5 and 7 a.m. And so I did all my training before work about 5 a.m. So during the week, I trained for an hour to an hour and a half every day. And then at weekends, I'd train for 5 or 6 hours. And those runs would also at weekends be at 5 a.m. because that way I felt that I wasn't really missing out on my spending time with my daughter and my husband at weekends. We were still having the family weekend together. And sometimes I'd fit my run in. For example, I'd run a long loop across the hills to the local park run. Then I'd race the park run pushing the buggy, and then we'd all go home together. My husband also runs, so he would race the park run seriously. So for example, we did that, and we did lots of hiking as a family together. But as I say, most of my training was done at 5 a.m. And in terms of what the mix of training was, I did a bit of speed work all the way through, actually. And those sessions were without a pack, but the rest of my training was, for the most part, done with a pack, with carrying a bag. Initially just like a kilo, and then I worked up to about 6 kilos. My final race pack was about 5.5 kilos. So that kind of got me used to the weight. And by the end, I was also, my training, I was also doing these back-to-back long runs, so 2 or 3 days back-to-back. And obviously my mileage increased. So by the new year, before the spine, I was running about 100 miles a week in training. But, lots of long-distance runners run far more than that. So, but that was the limit of what I could do realistically around my family. So that was kind of, I put in everything that I could all the time that I could, and that was what I managed. Yeah.
Did the training differ much from the sort of training cycles you'd gone through before? Because if you look at fell running championships and sky running championships, with fell runners, you just think they're going out there in nothing but short shorts and a vest, and suddenly you've got to have the full spine kit, and it's a race that's in the past favoured sort of people with an adventure racing background and stuff like that. Was this a very different approach to the training, or did you just tackle it as a longer version of what you'd done before?
Yeah, obviously it's, for example, the pack. So I wouldn't usually train carrying a bag unless I was training, for example, a mountain marathon. So for those events, you do need to be carrying a pack. But for the most part, fell races, you're only carrying a small amount of kit. So obviously that was different. The distance was also different. So it's more about just keeping going for long distances rather than kind of pure speed. At the same time, you don't want to lose the speed. So that's why we kept some of the speed work in sessions in there. But there's lots of kind of similarities and lots of parallels. For example, the skills I had with navigation from fell running really served me well for the spine as well. I was carrying a GPS, but it just helps to be able to read a map. I had map on my GPS as well, and just that kind of familiarity with map reading is really useful, as is the kind of, I guess, the skill of looking after yourself when the weather's bad, it's dark, you're kind of somewhere in the wilderness. You just have to know that, to stop and get dressed and make sure you're warm and dry. And, that those kind of skills, I think, come with experience, as does the sort of, I guess, mental strength to get through the times that are difficult and come out the other side, because invariably you'll have episodes like that. I'm running ultra races, and all of those skills I think were, I had already from fell running, and I just had to kind of hone them to the spine specifically.
And when we fast forward to the finish here, so you've put all of those years of experience, the 3 months of training, we've established that you was, I imagine it was about 6 to 10 hours a week of training time for that, maybe a little bit more, in and around a young family. You come to the finish line, you not only win the race, which is, I imagine at the time of you starting that race was a great result. You managed to knock off a serious chunk of time from the course record and be the first female to win. So it was almost like a triple whammy in terms of what you achieved on the finish line, but then it just blew up, right? The media came in, there was a bit of a frenzy. How was that? Because I guess when you started, you had no idea that might have been heading your way.
Well, I was going to ask about that. As someone who was working behind the scenes and watching all the emails coming in from every newspaper I'd ever heard of in the days that you were out there running, everyone was so excited to see you at the finish, but I knew we had this hand grenade we were going to have to hand you as well. But by the way, we know you've just finished the race, but literally everyone in the UK wants to talk to you right now. Did you have any idea that it was going to be that big?
Well, I guess I had no idea it was going to be that big, I guess. As a fell runner, our sport is a really sort of low-key sport. I guess things like skyrunning, that's a bit kind of more media wide and media savvy, but fell running is really sort of, it doesn't enter the general sort of mainstream media at all, and people tend to be quite, I guess, reclusive almost, and so that's kind of my background. And so for me it was really bizarre, the whole media thing. In terms of when I was running the race, I think the camera crew at one point mentioned to me that there was quite a big following on social media, so they did say that, but I had no idea just how big it was till I got to the end, and then I guess, yeah, like you say, it sort of exploded. It was crazy because I sort of wanted to please everybody and say yes to everything, but my phone didn't stop ringing. All my email, my work email, my Facebook, Twitter, everybody wanted to talk to me. And it was, whilst it was very nice that people were seemed to be so inspired by me, it was also quite overwhelming for a person, as I say, quite sort of used to sort of a fairly low profile in terms of their sport. So it was quite overwhelming, and it was an interesting experience. It's, to be honest, it's still not really stopped. There's still get maybe 3 or 4 requests a week to do stuff.
Well, sorry about that.
I've really just got better at sort of sifting through the things that I try to say yes now if it's something for charity, or if it's something that I have a strong sort of feeling about, something promoting women in sport, or breastfeeding or something like that. But it is difficult to to say no. I find it difficult to say no to anyone, really.
Well, I'm really, well, I think we're both really thankful that we were one that you said yes to. And you nicely touched upon our next question, really, because obviously a lot of media outlets picked up on this story for the inspiration that they could draw from it. One of the things that we were in particular really glad to see was a female kind of dominating this race so well. And then, like you say, the fell running community is quite humble and it's not really braggy. So what we saw from our point was lady runner comes and takes the course record, and then almost kind of quietly and gently goes, okay guys, I want to come back to my family and spend some time with the people that are more important in my life right now. And I can tell you this directly, Jasmin, we had a spike of female applicants for our race series not long after. And the female participation in our race has been growing probably above industry standard anyway. So we've been kind of trying to actively encourage women to take on our races. But there was a direct spike the months after that. And there's no doubt in my mind that was because of your story and people picking up on it and thinking, yeah, if Jasmin can do that, we can too. Female runners have been slowly increasing in participation in ultra running, but is there anything in particular that you would advise ladies in particular that are starting out and finding their way in ultra running, because I'm sure you've got some great advice being in it for a while and being a young mum. It can be quite daunting, right? So is there anything that you would tell any ladies that are looking at getting into ultra running and starting that journey now?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess the first thing would be don't be afraid to have a go, because it's so much fun, and it's ultimately it's really not about winning it, it's just about taking part. And I genuinely, lots of people ask me how I got through the spine and it was so hard and all this sorts of stuff, but ultimately I was just doing something that I love. I love running and I love being in the hills, so that in itself makes it just a pleasure. So the first thing is just enjoy it. Go running in beautiful places, if you can, if you have access to the sort of hills. And I just find that running off road is so much more enjoyable than running on the road. Run with friends, so if you can join a club, or just make some plans to run with friends, because I guess if you have any qualms about running on your own, then that sort of solves that problem. And it also just makes it more sociable, and it makes it less of a kind of I guess, a training workout, and more of a more just having a fun time with friends. And lots of my training is just based around long days in the hills with friends, either hiking or running. It's harder to do now with a small child, but yeah, that would be it. So kind of try and make it fun, and try and do things with friends or with other people. And and don't be afraid to just sign up. The first ultras I did, I had very little training for. I just signed up. As long as you keep eating, keep yourself warm. So don't be afraid to stop and put clothes on if you get cold. You really will be surprised at how far you can go. You don't have to be sprinting along. You can just kind of be jogging and walking. You'll actually get a very long way, without even doing much training at all.
There we go.
There you go. Have that.
So now our female participation is going to go up a gazillion %. Because there's no excuses. Yeah, we were really happy when, was it 2 years ago? We had a 50-50 split on our race for our Desert Ultra.
Yeah,
men
we
to
don't
female.
know what we did, but...
Yeah, it was crazy. The women seem to be kicking some ass right now. But I feel like we spoke a few episodes ago to Mimi Anderson as well. And I think, when you've got... people like yourself, Mimi Anderson and stuff, that are being such good role models in the sport, it's only going to be a matter of time before those numbers continue to pick up and balance out. I'm pretty sure of that. So what have you got lined up in the future? I imagine you've had some downtime after the spine. What's next on the list, or have you got anything actually lined up? Yeah,
so at the end of last summer, we ran the Petit Trot à Lyon, which is a kind of long version of the long race in the UTMB series. It's actually not officially a race; it's kind of more of an adventure with friends, and we ran that as a team of 3 with Jib Mann and my husband Conrad, and that was really good fun, really great adventure. So that was kind of another long distance thing. In terms of the future, I would like to run the Tour de Géant as a kind of another non-stop race, but with probably it's definitely got more ascent, and it's run in summertime, so it's a slightly different kind of scene, but I think one that I really relish the idea of having a go at. So the Tour de Géant, I'd quite like to probably at some point have another go at the UTMB, because I don't really feel like I did myself justice there. And whilst it's not entirely my race, it's not quite technical enough for me. It is sort of the world championship of kind of mountain ultra running, and I kind of would like to really see what I could do there. So probably at some point do the UTMB again. I'd like to run the Ultra Tour of Monte Rosa, because that looks like a fantastic race. Really good fun.
Yeah, Damien had a lot to say about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I guess there's been lots of sort of questions about whether I'll have a go at Barkley at some point.
Well, that saved us from asking it.
And the answer is, yeah, maybe. I think I need a little bit more time to sort of. I think maybe I'm currently at that point of the seed having been planted, and it needs to kind of grow on me a little bit more. The idea is that certainly is a commitment, both in terms of, I guess the travel. I'm trying not to travel so far to races now, and sort of being aware of my carbon footprint. So if we were to go, then we'd probably make it into a longer holiday. I'm also aware that the chances of finishing that race first time are pretty slim. So you're potentially setting yourself up for at least 2 or 3 years of attempts. So but it's kind of there at the back of my mind as a possibility. May well happen at some point.
After having done something as massive as you did on the Spine, is there sort of a burden of expectation when you look forward at challenges ahead as well?
Well, I think there is, in the sense that, otherwise people wouldn't be so. People seemed like super excited about the idea of me doing Barclays, and I think there would be quite a lot of pressure if I committed to something like that.
Speaking to John Kelly later, we'll ask him how crossing from one to the other went.
Yeah, so I think there is pressure, but at the same time, I was sort of, to some extent, accustomed to that already. There was a certain amount of expectation already. If you win races, then people expect you to do well next time round as well. It helped having a baby, actually, because it kind of reset the clock. People can't really expect that much if you're coming back after having a baby. So, so I think I'm probably, I guess, kind of used to the pressure to some extent. I do generally prefer to run as an underdog, in that sort of scenario, but probably everybody does, really.
Yeah, you've kind of shot yourself in the foot with the underdog thing now, Jasmin. I'm sorry. We've all seen how awesome you actually are as a runner.
Unless you plan to have a baby before every big race. You just have to schedule that in.
I think that might be more work than it's worth. Yeah, at some point that backfire.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think people by the 10th baby will be like, I know what she's playing at now. Jasmin, I wish we had more time. I feel like whenever your next adventure lays up, if it's UTMB or Monte Rosa, I'm sure there's going to be an army of people ready to watch and follow you and cheer you on. No pressure. But when that moment comes, either prior or just after, we'd love to have you back on to have a chat to see how all that went as well. And thank you for
thank you so
we
much
know
for,
that. Thank you for picking us out of the masses of
very welcome.
podcasts that we'll contact you every week. Just to remind everyone, as usual, you can subscribe on Spotify, iTunes, we're on YouTube.
You're listening to this.
Yeah, YouTube, we film it as well, so you can see our lovely podcast studio. You can find Jasmin Paris simply by putting Jasmin Paris into Google, and a whole army of stuff will come up. But you can read her story. She's done a great blog. If you are interested in the Spine race, she's done a great blog.
If you're interested in signing up for that race, you want to know about Jasmin or about the race, her blog about her experience in 2019 is fantastic, so go and look that up.
So go read that. And if you're a young mum or a lady that's looking at getting into ultra running, Draw On Jasmin's
You
inspiration
now know the sky's the limit.
to do that. Thank you very much, Jasmin. Thanks, guys, and we will see you next week. Ta-ra!
Bye.